Giaguit, hello. Welcome to the podcast series of the Center for Irish Studies at Villanova University. My name is Joseph Lennon, Emily C. Riley, Director of the Center.
And I'm Jennifer Joyce, Assistant Director and Curator of this series. We appreciate the support from our many donors, especially a generous grant from the Connolly Foundation.
Irish Studies at Villanova has existed for 40 years, and in that time, both Ireland and the Irish diaspora have changed enormously. This podcast series will reflect on these changes through the 9 different academic disciplines that are taught through Villanova's Center for Irish Studies. Our faculty and students will engage in discussions with distinguished thinkers, artists, writers, academics, political leaders, and other campus visitors.
This year, our central question will revolve around the changes the past 40 years have brought. Thank you so much for listening, and if you are in the area, please come to one of our events. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or email us at irishstudies@villanova.edu. Thank you and enjoy. Hello, and welcome to the first edition of the Villanova University Center for Irish Studies 40th Anniversary podcast series. I'm Jennifer Joyce, Assistant Director of the Center and Faculty in Irish Studies. We have a fabulous treat for you today, as I'm sitting here with Irish author Emilie Pine, whose book of personal essays, Notes to Self, won the Irish Book of the Year Award in 2018. Emilie is an Associate Professor of Modern Drama at UCD, or University College Dublin. Welcome, Emilie, and thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks so much for the invitation.
In my mind, and in the minds of many others, this is such a beautiful book about what it means to be a woman. You cover a range of topics, including alcoholism, infertility, divorce, depression, and even life in academia. It's authentic and raw and brave. So it's no surprise that Notes to Self has been a huge success, and over the last 2 years must have been a whirlwind for you. Have you found the audiences to be receptive, and are audiences different in the U.S. around this?
So the book is only just beginning in the US, but I'm over a year into having had it published in Ireland in July 2018. And it was funny, when I was writing the book, I kept coming back down from my little tiny room that I write in, down to my partner, and I would say, no one is going to read this book. And he would say, don't be thinking about that, just go back up and keep writing. And I suppose that's part of the joke of the title, Notes to Self, that I was really trying to write it for myself. And so I didn't think about the fact, and I didn't allow myself to think about the fact that someone would be reading an end product. Because if I had, perhaps I wouldn't have been quite as open or able to be quite as honest, and I would have censored myself in the way that we all do all of the time. You know, somebody asks how you are and you say you're fine, even if you're drowning. And I didn't want to do that in the book. I wanted to lay it all out. And so then when it was coming up to publication, and I said to the publishers, I got cold feet a little bit, and I said, could we publish it really quietly? And they said no, because, you know, it's their job to get a book out there. So they published it really loudly, and within a week it was in the bestsellers.
Amazing.
It was amazing, and I didn't expect it. And the thing that I really didn't anticipate was that people would then start talking to me. And that's been the best part of the reception. I mean, it's really lovely when your book gets sold and gets nice reviews and everything, but it's really when you meet people and they say, oh, you know, there's an alcoholic in my family too. And this is the key part. When I read your book, it made me feel less alone. And I think that sense of connection is really, really important and has been incredible. And it is starting to happen here in the US too. And one of the things as well is that I thought the book was very, very Irish. Because, you know, all of the issues that I explore, I mean, you say that I talk about divorce. Well, I talk about the fact that divorce was illegal in Ireland until 1997, and I thought, well, no one else is going to be interested in that. But it turns out that, you know, lots of families have divorce or breakup or separations, and it helps, I think, to read about the struggle that someone else's family went through. And, you know, one of the other things in the book is that I talk about in Ireland how the anti-abortion legislation, which made it completely illegal to have abortion or terminations in Ireland, really penalised me. And I desperately wanted to be a mother, but when I had a miscarriage and it went wrong, and the legislation meant that I wasn't able to get proper healthcare treatment for weeks. And amazingly, and no author ever says this, but amazingly, by the time I published the book, that was out of date.
Wow.
Because the referendum had been passed and the Eighth Amendment had been repealed, and now women are entitled to equal healthcare. And that was an amazing thing for me to see. And I also thought, well, that's a very quintessentially Irish story. And then you look around the world and you look in how many ways and in how many countries it's still difficult for women to access full and proper and equal healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's what you said about connecting and making people feel less isolated or less alone. I find that to be true in my own experience of reading your book. But also, I recently received a message from a former student, and Sophia Lockwood, who's a graduate of the Liberal Arts and Sciences College here at Villanova, and she studied abroad with me in Dublin through one of our Irish Studies internship programs. And last spring, she took a course with our Heimbold Chair author, Mike McCormick, also of Tramp Press, his book Solar Bones. And Mike taught Notes to Self in his class with Sophia. And I got this message from her, and she said, when I saw the mailing about notes in my email, at first I thought, oh, someone's just going to read from it at Villanova. And then she said, but when I found out it was actually Emilie Pine, I think my heart shattered a little bit that I'm going to miss her. And so she begged me that if I might pass on a question to you from her about the impact of your book. Would that be okay?
Yeah, I'd love that.
So she's actually a Fulbright right now and teaching English in Indonesia. And she says, our class allowed us the opportunity to explore your book in all the ways our hearts needed. One of the themes and notes we talked about the most was the renewal of the body. My question is, do you feel that the process of writing this book brought you to an acceptance for the journey of your body? Or do you think your experiences as a whole contributed to your rediscovery or renewal? So following, what would you say to young women like me who are only just beginning this journey of recognizing the ways that we've neglected our own bodies and hearts?
Wow, that's if you took the question mark off the end of that would be a great statement, actually, of description of how so many of us feel. I guess the whole process of writing about my body was just a series of discoveries, and still is. I think it's maybe only after having finished it now that I can reflect on what it was that I was trying to do and where I got to. And one of the things I would say now is what I've realized is the connection between voice and body. And just to explain that is that I didn't start out intending to write a book about my life. It, sometimes I say it happened by accident. I started out writing just about the things that were in my life that I had to get down on paper as a way of coping with them. When I had a conversation with Tramp Press, this independent Irish feminist press run by two women, Lisa Cohen and Sarah Davis-Goff, they said that they really liked what I'd written and would like to commission a book based on the small bit that they had seen. And I felt that gave me permission. And in hindsight, I can't believe that I was waiting for permission. And I think it's a problem that both men and women experience, but particularly women. The permission to use our voices and to talk about our experiences, intellectual and physical experiences, and to treat them as valid and important in and of themselves. And that step, treating yourself as important, is the first thing that you have to do. And it's so necessary. And we ignore it and avoid it so much of the time. Before you can go on to healing or working things through, or seeing yourself as important in relation to the rest of the world, and putting yourself at the top of your to-do list. And the thing is, and I have this conversation with so many of my female friends, and actually so many of my fellow, I don't want to fall into the gender binary, right? That this only happens to women, or it only happens to people with uteruses, or it only happens to men. But I have so many conversations with my friends in which we say, oh, I know that X, Y, or Z is what I should be doing to keep myself healthy or happy or, balanced in some way, but I'm still not doing it. And I think maybe that's the most frustrating part of it, is that we do know what we need. And we so often don't make ourselves go and get it, or we don't want to maybe sometimes using your voice or claiming your experience or talking about your body or addressing issues to do with your body means ignoring someone else's needs. It just happens that way. And sometimes you just have to do that. You have to be a little bit ruthless and you have to put yourself first. Or you have to follow through on the things that you know. I mean, I'm saying all of this in very abstract terms. For me, so much of it is that I'm not very good at looking after myself. So I will ignore health problems and not go to the doctor and, just take another couple of ibuprofen and power on through. And I will work incredibly long hours and I will ignore, will miss out on family and friends, the things that keep us sane and whole and healthy. And so I should follow my own advice is the kind of conclusion there. And we all should, and, should stay off social media and kind of read a book and those kind of things.
Yeah, I think that self-care in so many ways runs counterintuitively to the messaging that so many women are given in our society.
It does, and I love to go back to Audre Lorde, who started this whole, the phrase self-care. And for her, that was a revolutionary act, that you go and look after yourself in order so that you can continue the fight.
Right.
So you rest because we need to
gain
rest.
Strength and power, right.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I love what you said about making sure that we remember how valid and important we are. As if that's somehow a selfish thing. It's not, right? And I think, you and I have talked intimately about what it means to be a woman and what pressures are placed on us as women today in 2019 and how that in turn can affect one's self-worth. And that's sort of what I think Sophia was getting at as well. And so I know that when you and I first met this summer in Dublin, it was so great to connect and to recognize, we're the same age.
I know.
We have all of these things in common. We're both academics. We both, have some of these shared experiences. And so I was really excited to be here and be asked to interview you for this first podcast. And I wondered if you might do us the pleasure of doing a little bit of reading from the chapter or the essay that affected me most, which was the baby years. And then I have a selection here, and we jump around just a bit, but thank you.
I would love to. Just a tiny bit of context. This is the second essay in the book, and it's called From the Baby Years. When I started writing, when I knew it was going to be a book and I started writing it, this essay poured out of me because it was about the 3.5, 4 years that my partner and I spent trying to have children. And the plot spoiler is that we don't have children. And that was, for us, an incredibly lonely experience. And I think maybe more than anything else, the loneliness and that sense of isolation was the hardest. I mean, obviously there was the grief and then the physical endurance of all of the fertility tests and all the rest, but it was the loneliness. And so I really wanted to write this. This is what I would have liked to have been able to read. That was a kind of a long way of saying, effectively, I would have felt better had I had somebody writing this when I was going through it. So this is from the end. I am never going to have a baby. I am anxious about this fact, and I am grieving, and I am happy. Perhaps full acceptance is still a few steps down the road, because when I see my partner holding someone else's child, or actually, when I see any man carrying any baby, I am hit with the realization that I still grieve for my life as a mother. But the truth, what I have accepted, is this. I can try to have a baby, and I can fail every month and be unhappy. Or I can not try to have a baby and not fail every month. The total number of children I have had remains the same either way, a big fat 0, but the outcome is totally different. I choose to be happy. This happiness is not perfect or pain-free. It carries grief within it. It is all the stronger for that. And hurrah at last for 40. It was always my cut-off age. If I don't have kids by 40, I'd say to myself, I'll stop trying. Of course, I'd said that back in the heady days of 35, when 40 seemed far away, and I'd imagined not just one, but 2 kids filling those years. And I know that there are mums who are only just starting at 40, and I wish them luck, joy, and a baby that sleeps. But I'm done, and I'm more than a little relieved about it. Because now that I'm here, and I've been up and down the roller coaster, being 40 feels like a positive boundary. I can give myself permission to be someone else, someone other than a mother.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And after I finished this essay, I called my husband on the phone. I was in Ireland, and I read the last few pages out loud to him with tears streaming down my face. And I got on Amazon and I ordered copies for my mother and my sister. And I said to all of them, if you want to know what it felt like for me, she's done it. She's written it down. So exactly what you said about wishing someone had done that for you, you've been able to do that for so many other women. And it really struck me that, you get it, that this is what I went through, that, this piece gave me reassurance I wasn't alone. And maybe more importantly, that this life without children can be a fruitful, joyous, happy one that also can hold that and the grief, right? And the loneliness and the disappointment. But that, women like us, women over 40 who are childless, whether by choice or by circumstance, can revel in the fact that our strength comes from that, and that we can really sort of recognize that this strength can lead to a life of freedom, that so many messages in society suggest otherwise. That you're not a woman, and you're not a woman if you don't have children. And this book felt so liberating to me, for you to be courageous enough to put that into words. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It was liberating for me, and I wrote it very deliberately. And the essay, the first draft, when I, got it all down, didn't have that kind of uplift at the ending. It was still, I could have probably ended the essay with the word infertility. And then I thought, what a terrible thing to say about yourself. And that word failure that I just read out, I felt like that all of the time. I felt like such a failure. And then I thought, maybe the most feminist thing I can do is write myself a happy ending. And I probably didn't quite 100% feel it as I was writing it. There was an aspect of wish fulfillment there. I thought, okay, well, I'm going to declare that I will be happy. And amazingly, I'm so lucky. I'm so fortunate. Well, not completely fake it, but really put all my energy into it. And I am really happy. And I remember kind of going through, just in the early days of trying, that awful word, looking around and trying to find models of couples who were in their 40s and 50s and beyond, who had not had kids, but who were living really happy, fulfilled lives. And it was really hard to find them. And I thought, well, and I thought I'd find them in academia at least, but no. And then I thought, well, you've got to be the model now, Emilie. And I mean it. I mean it now. And I suppose that's part of the process of grief. When I say I grieve for my life as a mother, there are days where I couldn't do this little happy speech.
Sure.
And I feel it really strongly.
And that's okay.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it.
That you can hold both. And that's what I loved about the essay. And I'm wondering, you mentioned turning 40 as if it's this mark.
Oh, it's
this
amazing.
Moment that did you really feel that you could step strongly and decidedly into that decision to no longer, continue treatments, et cetera, and try to and just say, this is the cutoff, that was the threshold and you've crossed over and now.
And it was a relief. It was a real relief. And that's partly how my brain works anyway. I quite like there being rules because I think it makes life easier. Other people who are kind of, happy-go-lucky and they go with the moment. And I envy them, and that's fantastic, but it's not me. So, yeah, And that caused a little bit of grief as well, going through being 40, because, you're saying goodbye to a very generative period in your life, in your 30s. But actually, and I experienced this going from my 20s to my 30s as well. I remember being in my 30s and thinking, God, I would never go back.
Right.
Because there's so much uncertainty that plagues you in your in your 20s and your 30s, and it's not like I know everything now, but I have let go of so much, and I hear this from so many women in our age bracket and above. And it was funny, I was reading somebody's post somewhere, when I was reading on social media, and she was saying, she said, there's this mainstream media idea that we see in advertising and on TV and film and all the rest, that women fade away as they, are over 40, or that we're all anxiously running around worrying about the wrinkles, on our faces. I mean, it's just so not true.
No.
Like, look at us. We care less and less and less about those things. And it's such a liberation. And that's in a very general social sense. Yes, for me, probably the most truthful thing I can say now is that there are days when I think, oh, I'm probably happier now than if I had a baby.
That's wonderful, yeah.
That feels like a massive taboo, right, to say that, because I think, am I betraying my younger self who really, really wanted to be a mother? But no, it's like you say, you can hold two things in your body and in your mind, and they can both be true. I can say, I have a great life now. I would never have written notes to self. I wouldn't have, the creative life that I have now if I had been, because I would have given myself to my child.
Right. And also being childless doesn't mean you're not maternal, and that you can't express that, and maybe through your book, young women like Sophia, are responding and it's resonating with them in a way where you're sort of mothering in that sense. And,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think of the maternal people in your life. They can't all have given birth to you,
Right.
Yeah, and I'm really lucky that my sister has a little boy, and she's really generous, and she shares him with me, and I get to hang out with him, and then I get to go home and sleep the whole way through the night.
Too. Yes, I can totally relate, and I think you're right about the 40s and being in our 40s and how good that feels to sort of stand in yourself and know who you are and make these decisions with some, not without deliberation and not without difficult experiences, but that, we're moving forward and feeling like that acceptance, I think, that you're talking about, and then therefore the benefit of the freedom that comes along with it. And it seems like 40 is our magic number today because we're celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Center for Irish Studies here at Villanova. And so we've been doing a lot of thinking here on campus about what has changed in Ireland over the last 40 years. And as I was thinking about you and our stage of life, and I thought, it would be a great thing to ask Emilie, over the course of your lifetime, what have you seen change in Ireland in these 40 years?
Well, I mean, when I remember really strongly, it was 1989, so I was 12, and being with friends, and I just started secondary school, and high school, you call it? Yeah, high school. And sitting with my friends, and we all were having this really long conversation about emigrating, because we could not imagine living in Ireland. It did not feel like a country where it was possible for us to be ourselves. Wow. And, I'm middle class and straight and white and privileged and, all of those things. It wasn't that I was discriminated against or marginalised, but it felt economically and socially not possible. And then, you have the election of Mary Robinson as the first president. And that really, I think, that really signalled the beginning of the change. And that, here we are in our 40s talking about the change. Change is great, guys, seriously. and prosperity, the Celtic Tiger, changed things. And then, so those are really really strong positives. I think there are negatives really pushing change as well. And the scandals of abuse to do with the Catholic Church have broke something. And obviously the people who really suffered were those people who were in institutions or who were abused by priests. But the people who also suffered in a way were the people who really invested belief in that institution. And as a result, I think there has been a separation of faith and institutionalism. And I mean, this is not my area of study, so I won't go on about it, but I think that enabled people in the last 3 referenda. So I think of the the three of them, I think of divorce in 1995, which passed by 5,000 votes or something tiny. Then I think of the equal marriage referendum, which passed by a much larger margin. And then I think of the repeal the eighth referendum last year. And the way in which those would not have been possible without people voting with their hearts and their minds in order to make the country a better place for other people, as well as for themselves. And that act of generosity has been wonderful. And I remember waking up after all three of those referenda and feeling more an equal citizen and feeling like this is the place that I want to make my home. And that feels, in the current political climate internationally and within Europe, we're in Ireland, we're facing Brexit, which is quite terrifying. And it feels like Ireland is quite enjoying the status of being the progressive ones for a change. And we went through a lot to get here. And there's something my mother always says, my mother worked in equality law, and so she brought through the first equality and anti-discrimination legislation in the late 1990s. And I remember her saying when it was enacted in 1999, she said, there is an advantage to waiting this long to get proper rights legislation. She goes, it's now the best in the world. And Ireland now is leading in terms of the recognition of people's human rights. And I think that's incredible. And so that conversation that I had in 1989, I don't think kids are having that conversation now. And that's fantastic.
Yeah. And it seems like, my students, when we go over to Ireland in the summers, they're so surprised by how progressive it is. And, we have, I think, in America, a little bit of a sort of historic picture of Ireland. And
we still have that. I think, so actually, that's the balance to what I've just said, is that there's such a bonus to being a small country. Because we still have all of so much tradition, not all of it, but so much tradition. And I think that's because we still really value community.
And family.
And that comes first. And I think
it's evident there.
Yeah.
It's lovely. I mean, we as Americans really enjoy it when we're there. And then it's also really vibrant to be in Dublin and watch the Gay Pride Parade or see people participating in the repeal the eighth vote and grandfathers out there with signs. And, it really is a new Ireland in many ways, but are kind of hopefully holding on to some of those nuggets of the past and the traditional elements, like you said, that
close-knit.
Their value.
And we're still green,
Yeah.
I mean, and we still have a really strong sense of, I think, heritage. And a lot of that comes through literature and culture. We really hold writers and artists and people who are not, full-on capitalists. We have a poet for a president.
Yes.
And I think that's a mark of how much those things are held in respect.
Absolutely.
And he's a great president.
So you've done this book, Notes to Self, and speaking of writing, what's next for you? I read somewhere that you're going to be, or you are currently the writer-in-residence at the National Maternity Hospital?
Yes, I am.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So Notes to Self has been a success, which has been fantastic. And as I said, I always wanted to be a writer, and it has given me a creative life and an opportunity to do the dream, right? And to just go for it. And again, this is another thing where you just kind of go, you're not going to get this twice, go, do it. And so I've taken a year off my job as an academic, and and you asked me to read that passage out of The Baby Years. And one of the things that has happened consistently over the last year is that women have been in touch with me to tell me their own stories about not just infertility. Lots of them have healthy children, but it was very difficult for them to get there, or they had very difficult experiences, or they had a child who died, or actually they went through the maternity services and they looked normal from the outside, but they still had a hard time. And they say, my story is also your story, and then will tell me their stories. And I thought I was done. I thought that was writing myself a happy ending was a way of walking away from it. And as it started to come out, I realized that I heard these stories and that there was so much more to tell. And most of these people do not, most people, because most people are sensible, do not want to publish the small details of their life publicly. But maybe as a writer, I could help to do that. And so I had a conversation with the master of the maternity hospital, and he started his new tenure in January. It's a huge period of change for maternity services in Ireland because of the introduction of termination legislation. And also a huge kind of moment, I think, for women's health. And I'm really interested in the intersection of power and health and structure, down to the very simple issue of the majority of women, and I'm sure it applies to men too, but I talk mostly to women, the majority of women that you talk to about their encounters with the health service will say that they did not feel listened to. And that's really striking. And I think that's something I can do, and that's something writers can do. And I'm interested in hearing what they have to say and exploring that further.
Excellent. That sounds fabulous.
So
really.
I'm in the hospital, which features really strongly in my book, actually. And that has been personally quite challenging as well, because I'm, walking the same staircases and corridors and so on where I had really bad experiences. But it has been redemptive as well to be back and to say, okay, and it comes back to where we started. It comes back to claiming your space and saying, I will not be shifted. I will claim my space and my voice in this space.
Yeah, and you're lending that voice to the voices of others as well.
Yeah, in theory, yeah.
Hearing it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things I'd really like to do as well is kind of creative writing workshops for patients and staff. I just think...
That sounds therapeutic.
Yeah, it is. And I think everybody should... I was talking to a student the other day, and she said, "Oh, I'm not a writer. I've only ever written a couple of things." And I said, "You are a writer." And she said, "Oh, no, I'm not. And I said, "You don't have to be published. You don't have to write it for public attention in order to be the writer of your own story." And I think that's a very empowering thing to say to people. You get to write your own story.
Thank you so much, Emilie. That sounds wonderful. Are you envisioning a collection of essays again with this next project, or you don't know yet?
I don't know yet.
The format hasn't taken shape
yet. You can't see this, but we're sitting here grinning because I'm just like, I don't know. Partly I think that's because writers are superstitious. You don't want to say that you're going to do a thing,
and then change
exactly.
Shape. Yeah.
And partly I am trying this radical openness, right? Let's just see what comes and hope that inspiration will come along with it.
Well, we really look forward to that and hope that when that next project is complete, you'll come back and visit us here at Villanova.
I'd love to.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here, Emilie, on our first installment of the 40th anniversary series for Irish Studies, this podcast. And thank you all for listening.
Thanks so much.